So this is December 18th, 2021, 26 2nd Avenue. And we're reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 13. And this is a verse that Srila Prabhupada quotes very often. It's what we would call one of the key verses of the Bhagavad Gita. Yajna shishta shanto muchante sarva kilbishai punjate te tvagam papa ye pachantyatmakaranat. So I want to chant that together, and staying on mute, we can chant together. Yajna shishta santo muchante sarva kilbishai punjate te tvagam papa ye pachantyatmakaranat. Yajna shishta, of food taken after performance of yajna. Ashina, eaters. Santaha, the devotees. Mujjante, get relief. Sarva, all kinds of. Kilbishai, from sins. Bunjate, enjoy. Te, they. Too, but. Agam, grievous sins. Papaha, sinners. Ye, who. Pachanti, prepare food. Atma karanat, for sense enjoyment. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The devotees of the Supreme Lord, or the persons who are in Krishna consciousness, are called santas, and they are always in love with the Lord, as it is described in the Brahma Samhita 538. Premanjana charita bhakti vilochanena santa sadaiva hridayeshu vilokayanti. The santas, being always in a compact of love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead Govinda, the giver of all pleasures, or Mukunda, the giver of liberation, or Krishna, the all-attractive person, cannot accept anything without first offering it to the Supreme Person. Therefore, such devotees always perform yajnas in different modes of devotional service, such as Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Archanam, Bhagavatam 7.5.23, etc. And these performances of yajnas keep them always aloof from all kinds of contamination of sinful association in the material world. Others who prepare food for self or sense gratification are not only thieves, but are also the eaters of all kinds of sins. How can a person be happy if he is both a thief and sinful? It is not possible. Therefore, in order for people to become happy in all respects, they must be taught to perform the easy process of Sankirtana Yajna in full Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, there can be no peace or happiness in the world. Yajnashtistatina santo muchante sarvakil vishai punchate pagam papa ye prachantyatmakarana. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which has been offered first for sacrifice. Those who eat food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. So here we are coming up to Christmas time in the West, and we have the word Santa here in our Sanskrit, right here. See? Santa. Of course, in Sanskrit, it's pronounced santo, and which is very similar to the Spanish word. Like you have Santa Barbara, right? Santa in Spanish means a female saint. And the word sant or santa also means a devotee. Interestingly, those words are not related. At least the linguists can't see any relation in the family tree between the Sanskrit word Santa and the Spanish word Santa or the Latin word saint, but they all mean the same thing, and they're certainly spelled very similarly and sound very similarly, although they can't trace out a similar history. And we have here at the end of this purport, Prabhupada talks about peace or happiness in the world, a very common theme of Christmas, right? Santa coming to bring peace and happiness in the world. So it's certainly an interesting verse to be talking about at this time of year. So who are these santas? Who are these devotees? These are people that actually in Sanskrit, the word santa is related to the word sat. Sat means that which is true, that which is real, that which is eternal, that which exists. So a santa is somebody who lives in accord with truth. And this truth is very simple. Truth is the way things are designed to work. It's goodness. It's interesting that the word sat in Sanskrit means both goodness and truth and existence. There's a discussion in the Bhagavatam, in the 7th canto. Is God partial? It seems like that, doesn't it? Right? Some people have more money than I have, or more beauty than I have, or more health than I have, or a nicer family than I have. I mean, I have a great family, but they may have nicer facility in some ways. They're smarter than I am, whatever, stronger, more famous. And I may think, well, God's partial. Why is he giving these people something better than what he's given me? Or I may look at somebody less fortunate than I am and say, why did God not give that person all? It seems that he's partial. And the Bhagavatam, the answer is no, God's not partial, but the world favors sattva. The world favors truth. The more one works in accord with truth, the more one gets, as Prabhupada's saying here, peace and happiness. So a santa, someone who works with sat, is more likely to have peace and happiness. So I give this analogy all the time, but I think it is just such a clear understanding. I am currently in a room that has one door and 2 windows and 4 walls. So if I want to exit the room, I exit through the door. And if I exit through the door, I'm happy. If I try to exit through the windows, I will definitely be a lot less happy. Now, this room is on the ground floor, so it won't be catastrophic. However, if my room was on the 5th floor or the 10th floor or the 20th floor, exiting out the window might indeed be catastrophic. And if I try to exit through the wall, then I'm just going to get some bruises. And if I really try to exit through the wall with great force, I might even break something. So the truth of this room is that the door is meant for ingress and egress, and the walls are not, and the windows are not. And if I act in harmony with the way that the room is designed, I get peace and happiness. And if I act in a way in opposition to the way the room is designed, I don't get peace and happiness. Rather, I suffer. This suffering is not some sort of punishment by the architect or the builder of this room, and not at all. It is simply my acting out of harmony with the way that things are designed, with the way things are meant to be. And Srila Prabhupada will often use interchangeably the words laws of God and laws of nature. There's this one medical doctor who writes that if your ideology isn't in accord with biology, then you might want to rethink your ideology. So what we believe to be true, what we believe to be right, it should comport with what is. I mean, that just sounds so obvious, but it isn't obvious. It isn't obvious. And what we call sin is, Prabhupada will define that as willful disobedience to the law of God. So I may walk through the wall because I'm a fool. And I may also walk through the wall out of willful disobedience. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. But children do that kind of thing. Little children will intentionally bang their head against the wall when they're angry. It's actually quite a common behavior of little children, that they'll throw themselves on the floor or throw themselves at the wall, and they'll bang their head against the wall when they're upset. So that's willful disobedience to the laws of nature. Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. Or it can just be ignorance. For example, we've all had the experience of an insect that's caught inside our room and desperately, desperately trying to get out of the room. And we open the door and we try to get the insect to go out of the door, and it simply refuses. It just won't do it. It thinks that we're going to capture it and eat it, I suppose. And it'll go against a screen door in the window where it can feel the air, it can see the outside and feel the outside. So the poor little bug is thinking this is the way out, but it gets stuck. And if it won't go out the door, of course, it will eventually die. So one can be violating the laws of nature either through ignorance, like that little bug, or through willful disobedience, like a petulant toddler. But this is what sin means. Sin means doing something that is against truth. And therefore, there is suffering built in to sin. It's not exactly that there is some mean God who says, okay, I have all these rules, and if you break them, you will suffer. There is some of that. I mean, the Bhagavatam does describe particular punishments after death and particular rewards after death for those who do good deeds and bad deeds. But it's not just that. As Prabhupada says here, someone who's sinful and a thief cannot be happy. So what is this law of God and this law of nature that the santas are observing in their eating that makes them happy and that gives them peace? If we look at the way nature is designed, we see that in one sense, nature is very violent. One living being, as the Bhagavatam says, is food for another. There is definitely fear and competition and so forth. But there is also giving and sharing in the natural world, at least generally among the same species, generally, with some exceptions. Sometimes there's giving and sharing between species. And sometimes, of course, there's violence within a species, but that's more of an unusual situation. Within the last couple of years, I think I read a book called The Secret Life of Trees, which I would really highly recommend. And it was about how trees communicate with each other through their roots, how the trees will feed each other through their roots. We all know that trees are getting food from photosynthesis from the sun. And I thought that was it. That's how trees eat. But trees also nourish each other. And this is the reason why sometimes when a person cuts down a tree and there's just a stump, there's no leaves to provide photosynthesis, branches will grow out of that stump and have leaves on it. Well, how is that possible? How did the stump remain alive? Because the other trees in the forest were feeding that stump underground. And that trees have a whole communication network. I mean, it's just phenomenal how trees in a natural forest, not a man-made forest, but a natural forest. Man-made forests, sometimes the trees are planted too far apart to do this, will help each other out. And of course, we know this is true among other animals in the world. At least animals tend to help out their offspring or their mate, or if they're herd animals, the other members of their tribe. There's some sense of giving and receiving in the natural world. And even without a conscious effort, there's a lot of symbiotic relationships in the natural world. There's a lot of plants that can't exist without certain insects, and the insects can't exist without certain plants, and so forth. So this giving and receiving is part of life. And we as human beings, we really have a difficult time existing without giving and receiving, without this exchange of love. Rupa Goswami, of course, explains the Dati principle in his Upadeshamrita, his nectar of instruction, where he talks about three main areas of giving and receiving: that we give and receive food, we give and receive presents, and we give and receive confidences, confidential talks. So this is how we get the most pleasure in life. A person can say, like here we have Atmakarnat, just trying to please yourself. So we all have experience, all of us, that doing things just to please ourselves is often not as pleasurable as spending the same amount of time, energy, and money in pleasing somebody else. All of us have this experience. I mean, at Christmas time in most of the world, people exchange gifts. Now, When you exchange a gift, do you always risk that you'll buy something the other person doesn't like? And you always risk that somebody will give you something that you don't like. So why don't we have a program at Christmas where everybody takes that same amount of money that they would spend on buying gifts for other people and spend it all on themselves? Right? Doesn't that sound more practical? You know, if I'm going to spend $500 in Christmas gifts for all my friends and family, and I don't know whether they'll like what I buy them or not, they might not even like it. And I'm figuring I'm probably going to get about $500 worth of gifts back from friends and family, but, you know, I might not like that stuff either. Whereas if I took that same $500 and I went shopping, I could buy stuff that I liked. So we could have that as a tradition. You know, everybody takes the money they would spend on their friends and family, their coworkers, whatever, and they all spend it on themselves and they get something exactly that they want. Why don't we do that? Why isn't that a thing? Because it's not as pleasurable to just do something for yourself as to do something for others. And again, we all experience that. You know, if we like to cook, we might cook some food that we really enjoy eating. You know, those of us who like to cook and are good cooks and we like what we cook, so we cook something that we like and we sit down alone and we eat it. That is not as much fun as giving food to someone you like, or giving food to someone who's needy, giving food to somebody who's in poverty or homeless, or that's so much more enjoyable. And very, very wealthy people will spend their holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas going to some place where people are in need, where people are disadvantaged, and they will feed them rather than just staying home and eating an opulent food themselves. So it's a basic truth that giving is more pleasurable than just thinking about ourselves, giving and sharing. And the best kind of giving and sharing is where we don't keep score, where I'm not calculating, well, let's see, I spent $150 last year on your present, and this year I'm spending $225, and I think your present for me was only worth $25, so I don't know. We don't calculate like that, not in our close, loving relationships. In fact, calculating like that in close, loving relationships is insulting. If you go to grandma's for your Christmas dinner and you say, "Oh, grandma, that was great. What do I owe you now? What, $300 for the meal?" Everybody in your family would be offended. And we regularly give, I had just the other day. So my granddaughter was taking her husband out for his birthday, and they went to fly to New Orleans. And right before they were getting ready to leave, her husband said, "Oh, do you have a TSA approved lock that I could use for my check-in luggage?" I said, "Yeah," and I found one. And he said, "Oh, it's not going to fit." And I'm looking at the time and thinking, are they going to have time to stop and buy a lock on the way to the airport? And they said, "Maybe we'll stop at Walmart, get one." And I said, "Well, if you like, I can drive to Walmart and get one and come back." So it's a 10, 15-minute drive each way. And my granddaughter looked at me and said, "You'd be willing to do that?" And I hadn't even thought when I offered about it. I just offered. They ended up picking one up themselves, but I didn't even think about it. I just said, "Oh, I'll go pick one up for you." So why do we do that? Why do we just offer help like that? Or, they went away for the weekend and my daughter and I have been watching the little kids so they can have a weekend together for his birthday. And that's the kind of thing we do for close friends, for family, for our close associates. You give a lot, and you give a lot. You have some sense that in close relationships, you're going to get back. You have some sense, I'm there for you. I know you're going to be there for me. But it's not a keeping score thing. And our happiness in giving is the giving. That's our happiness. Our happiness isn't thinking, well, I've given you this, so I'll get back this. It's not a calculated thing. We simply take pleasure in giving. So a santa lives with this sat, with this reality that the highest pleasure, the highest happiness is love. And an expression of love is service, is giving and sharing without consideration of return, or the return that one gets is the joy of giving itself. But one is not even giving for the joy of giving. One is giving out of love, and the joy of giving is a natural concomitant factor. Because whenever we act in harmony with truth, we feel happy. Exactly like if I walk out of my door instead of trying to walk out of my window, I feel happy. So what is the opposite? The opposite of this is being selfish and fearful. Always putting myself first, always calculating. Well, I don't know if I really want to help. I don't know if I really want to give. I don't know if I really want to share. What about me? What about me? What about me? Well, if I make a special trip to Walmart to get the lock, maybe they won't even appreciate it. So maybe I shouldn't do it. And then maybe when I need something, they won't be there for me. So why should I do it? And let me just cook for myself. I don't want to share anything. Right? This is, of course, in Dickens' Christmas Carol, Scrooge is like this. He's just a miser. He's keeping all of his money for himself. He won't even pay his employees enough money for them to have a decent meal at Christmas. And he's doesn't even know how to spend his money on himself. He's just counting his money. And he's a miserable, miserable person. So this is the calculation kind of thing. What about me? What about me? Atmakaranat, as Krishna is saying here. I'm just doing things for myself. Whatever opulence I get, whatever food I get, whatever clothing I get, I hoard it, or I spend it just for myself. And if I do anything for anybody else, it's with a calculating mentality. And I like to cheat others even. I'm thinking, well, if I can get a good deal, if I can give you less than what you give me, then I become happy. But such a person is not actually happy. This mood is described in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam in chapter 32, where Krishna says, if one has this mentality in one's relationships, where one has a merchant mentality, where one is thinking, well, I'll give to you only what you give to me, and I'm going to keep score. And if possible, I'll give to you less than what you give to me, kind of the way we enjoy buying things on sale. Oh, wow, it's on sale. And we don't go to the shopkeeper and say, are you sure that you can sell this? Are you going to be able to survive? We're like, great, I'm getting it half off. So if the one who thinks like this, Krishna says, that there's no dharma, there's no prema. There's no prema means love. He says there's no friendship, there's no happiness. It's very heavy condemnation Krishna gives. He says there's no dharma. Dharma means the essence of something, authenticity. Something that's dharmic is authentic. Again, we're coming to this truth concept. So there's no dharma. There's nothing. It's phony. I'm giving, but I'm giving in a calculating way. It's phony. There's no dharma. There's no friendship. I'm not taking any happiness in your happiness. I'm not taking any happiness in love. There is no love. There is no love. And, if we're going to think about how we would define evil, it would be something like this. This would be included. Evil is that I do good for others only when it benefits myself, and I'm very calculating about it. And in fact, if I can get away with not doing good for others, I won't. My whole focus is on myself. I would never do anything good for anybody else if I had a choice. And if I do good for somebody else, it's just for some self-serving purpose, maybe so others will think well of me, or, I'll get some sort of facility. And so again, it's a stealing mentality. Everything belongs to me. I have a right to everything. And so one cannot be happy. Now, the mentality that we have, whether it's a mentality of love and giving and reciprocation, or a mentality of selfishness, is especially apparent when it comes to our physical biological necessities. So, we can say, oh, I'm like this or I'm like that. But how we really are is demonstrated in how we deal with the physical necessities of life. And the reason for this is somewhat of the biological imperative. For example, I can be very kind if I'm not hungry, thirsty, or tired or sick. But as soon as I'm hungry, thirsty, tired, or sick, I may not be kind anymore. I may be grumpy, and I may become self-absorbed. And this problem happened even to Maharaj Parikshit. Maharaj Parikshit, when he was hungry, tired, and thirsty, he was very rude to a great sage, and he was insulted a great sage. So why is that? Well, if I'm very kind and caring when I'm hungry, tired, thirsty, or sick, then I may not take care of my own biological needs and I may die. So there's something wired into us that when our own body is in danger, we become more selfish. That's a fact. But therefore, in all the scriptures of the world, there are processes of austerity that deal with the bodily necessities. And food is a top one. So most religions of the world have some kind of restrictions about food. Like in the Old Testament, there's certain kinds of food that you can eat and certain kinds you can't eat, and certain kinds you can't eat mixed with other food. In the Quran, there's certain kinds of food you can't eat. Right? In the Vedas, certain kinds of food you can't eat. And then there's certain times when one is supposed to fast. So every religion has times that you're supposed to fast, or times you're supposed to fast from certain kinds of food, like the Catholics at Lent. They go for a month where there's certain kinds of food that they won't eat. Yeah, and of course you have the Muslims who go for a month where they only eat between sunset and sunrise. And we have in our Vaishnava tradition, we have 2 days a month, 2 days every lunar month, where we don't eat staple foods. We eat very light foods. And then we have other days where we're fasting. And it's also fascinating that the concept of food in the scriptures, again, in all the scriptures of the world, is to give food in charity. That one should share one's food. And one should share one's food, even if one is personally hungry. We have an extreme example in the Bhagavatam of Rantidev, who was extremely hungry and yet shared his food to the point that he might have died from starvation, but still he shared his food. So this kind of principle. It's also interesting that the rules for renunciates, again, we find this in various traditions. The Jews don't really have renunciates, but among the Christians and the Buddhists and the followers of the Vedas, we find that rules for renunciates often involve food, just like there's 4 levels of sannyas, as explained in the Bhagavatam, and these have to do primarily with food. So the first level is you get your food from your family, and the next level is you can beg door to door. And there's a level where you don't beg at all, like Madhavendra Puri, who traveled without ever asking anyone for food. And if anyone gave him food, he would accept. And if no one gave him food, he would fast. And sometimes he was fasting for days. So these regulations are there to get us out of this atmakarna thing, to get us out of this, I'm just going to think about myself. And especially when it comes to something like food, where the tendency to just think about ourselves and be selfish will be especially dominant. Now, this concept of sharing our food and not being self-absorbed and finding happiness in giving to others, the ultimate expression of that is not with other people or animals, but with God. So this concept that truth and happiness and joy and goodness comes from letting go of anxiety, as Krishna says in the 2nd chapter. He says, Niryoga Kshema Atmavan, let go of all anxieties for gain and safety and be established in self. So this being willing to share our food with others, even if we're unsure about our own eating, and to take pleasure in serving others, is supposed to be meant to apply not only to other living beings, but to the divine. Now, later on, Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gītā that if we cannot do this for Krishna, if we cannot do this for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, at least we should give in charity to others. He says that in the 12th chapter. at least give in charity and try to be self-situated. But ideally, we give to God. Now you can say, well, God doesn't need anything. Why should I give to him? Why don't I just give to poor people? And giving to poor people is also laudable and recommended. But the idea is that we want to develop this loving relationship with God. If our loving relationship with friends and family and this giving of self, giving of our time, giving of our energy, giving of our food, brings us so much happiness in this world. In fact, it's what brings us, again, the greatest happiness. I'm going to ask the question again. Why doesn't everyone just spend their Christmas money on buying things that they like for themselves? Obviously, we find greater happiness in risking giving to others and having them give to us. That process of thinking about others and shopping for them brings us greater happiness than the surety of buying something for ourselves that we would like. So to take that happiness and give it to the Supreme, because the unfortunate reality is that if I only do this with other people or animals in this world, I often end up disappointed as well. It's certainly more pleasurable to have loving, giving relationships with others than to be selfish. But my loving, giving relationships with others in this world are also not a surefire way of being happy and peaceful. Other people may not be appreciative. They may even be critical. I'm sure we've all had that experience, right? You get a present for someone and they just make some nasty remark. And someone just did that to me recently, Oh, how did your kid enjoy the gift I got her for her birthday? Well, she doesn't like that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, thanks. We've all been victims of that kind of stuff. Oh, really? Why did you get that? I remember decades ago, one of my relatives saying that to me about a birthday gift. Like, what kind of a birthday gift was that you gave me? Like, didn't your mother teach you just to say thank you? So, sometimes we get discouraged. And in fact, our disappointments from people with whom we're close are the most painful disappointments that we experience in life. So the people to whom we've given our heart and soul and our bodies, when they disappoint us, we experience some of the greatest pain that we experience in this world. But the principle of finding happiness through giving is still true, which is why, somebody will get married for the 6th time. Because even though they've been hurt so many times, they're still thinking, well, I want this loving reciprocation. Because it is true. It is sat. But the santas realize that the actual truth of this is to give to the perfect person. So the santas, they say, oh, actually, all the food I have is given to me by God. Now, that's true even if you make your food in a laboratory. Even if you buy, a lot of this non-food food that's prevalent today. Stuff that, sort of looks like food and sort of tastes like food, but isn't really food. Even then, all the ingredients came from it. What to speak of if you eat real food? All real food is a transformation of sunlight, water, and earth minerals. That's it. All the different varieties, whether it's an apple or it's a banana or it's a cucumber or, the glass of milk. It all comes from sunlight, water, and earth minerals. And Krishna has given this to us in such abundance. There's so many varieties of fruits. And then there's varieties of varieties. At least in the United States, any grocery store you go in, you're going to find at least 4 or 5 kinds of apples, at least. And there's dozens of kinds of apples and dozens of kinds of bananas. And I think there's like 40 kinds of mangoes. So there's so many varieties of varieties. Far more than we need. We actually don't need that much variety just to be healthy and strong. There's so much love that Krishna has given us with all of this food. And so the devotee, instead of just saying, oh, thank you, the devotee who's the santa gives it back. Oh, let me take this food, prepare it nicely for you, and return it to you as a gift. Not because God is in need of anything. I mean, everything, he's created everything. And in one sense, he is everything. He's not in need of food. It's already his. But Prabhupada gives the example that just like the parent gives the child some money and the child goes out and buys a present for the parent with the money. I mean, I remember doing that for my father's birthday, which was, my father's passed away, but his birthday was on December 24th. And so while everybody else was doing Christmas shopping, I was doing my father's birthday shopping. And somehow I think I usually bought him a tie. So, I would get a little bit of money every week from my parents as an allowance. And then my mother would take me out shopping and she would help me pick out a tie that my father would like. And then when I gave it to my father, he'd say, "Oh, thank you for this tie." I mean, I didn't really have very much to do with it. But that was the mood. Actually, one of my godbrothers told me the story how when one of his sons was 6 years old and they were outside, the little boy comes up to the father with a stick and he says, Daddy, here's a stick for you." And the father was, "Oh, that's how Krishna feels." And Krishna is accepting the love. As he says later in the Bhagavad-gītā, Patram Pushpam Pulam Trayam, Yo me bhaktya prayachiti, Tadaham bhakti paritam, Asnami prayatat. That Krishna is accepting the love. So when one is offering food in sacrifice to the Lord as yajna, yajna means basically, Prabhupada uses the English word sacrifice. It's hard to find a good word, or an English word for the word yajna. It means some sort of ceremony of connection. And just like on the material level, a ceremony of connection is I give people food. I take somebody out to eat at a restaurant, or I cook for them, or I send them food in the mail. So a ceremony of connection with the Lord, who's a person, is to offer him food. And just like in this world, I offer you food, you may offer some of it back to me. Yes? Happens all the time. I was recently visiting the youngest son in California, and we met up with some of my devotee friends there. We went to one devotee's restaurant. So we did what a lot of people do at restaurants, where we ordered a few dishes that we shared among each other. Right? So we ordered a veggie burger, and then, we cut it in half, and each person took a half, and we ordered a plate of sweet potato fries, and we divided them up. So I'm giving you some of my food, and then you're taking some of that, and you're giving it back to me. So that's what's happening with Krishna. Krishna is giving us the food. We're giving it back to him, and then he's giving it back to us. Yes? And so this is a very basic way. This is a very basic way of establishing a loving connection with God and making us extremely happy. Now, does that mean we don't have any loving exchanges with other people or other living beings? No, we do, but we do that as part of our loving relationship with Krishna. As Srila Prabhupada told my father in 1975, Prabhupada looked at myself with our oldest son who was on my lap. And Prabhupada said, just like this woman is loving her son without expectation of return, in the same way one should love Krishna. And my father said, well, loving her son, help her to love Krishna. Prabhupada said, no, but loving Krishna will help her to love her son. So when I take the bountiful, incredible gifts of food that Krishna has given, and I prepare it thinking about him, and I offer it back to him in the ceremony of love, and then he again offers it back to me as his mercy. We call it prasadam. Prasadam means mercy or grace. Then I take that grace and I share it. I share it at least with my family members, with my friends, with my neighbors, with my coworkers, with the creatures that live outside my house, the insects and the birds and the animals that are outside. I share it. So there's this constant, Krishna is sharing with me. I share with him. He shares back with me, and I share with others. And this way, one becomes peaceful and happy. It's such a simple idea of a ceremony of connection. And we find that in most religions, there's some kind of connection ceremony associated with food. That before people eat, they'll at least say some blessing, thank you, dear Lord, for this food you've given us. I was brought up in the Jewish tradition, and not every day, but on the Sabbath, we had this ceremony where we had some bread. It would be covered with a beautiful embroidered cloth on a silver tray, and we would remove the cloth. We'd hold it in the air and we'd ask God to bless the food, and then we would give everyone a little piece of the bread. So later, after I joined the Hare Krishna movement, I understood that this ceremony was very much like prasadam. This concept that first we offer things to the Lord and then we share them. Now, of course, prasadam, the offering of food to the Lord, Prabhupada says anyone who does this on a regular basis is to be considered a devotee. And the sharing of prasadam is a huge part of our Hare Krishna movement. I mean, it's just major. Prabhupada, it's interesting in this purport that Srila Prabhupada talks about Sankirtan Yajna. It's interesting that he doesn't so much talk about the distribution of prasadam in this purport, but he talks about the chanting of the holy name. But of course, Krishna says later that, later on in the Bhagavad-gītā, I think it's in chapter 17 or 18, that yajna should also be accompanied by the distribution of sanctified foodstuffs. And certainly the Hare Krishna movement is known for these two things, for chanting the holy name and for distributing food that's been offered to the Lord. Actually, the first time that we met with Srila Prabhupada in 1974, and my father asked Srila Prabhupada, he said, why are you so anxious to give people your food? My father was himself a CEO in a major food business. And he said, I'm in the food business, and I'm really curious as to why you're so eager to give people your food, even people who don't know anything about your philosophy or not interested in practicing your religion. And Prabhupada was very jovial, and he leaned back and he smiled. And Prabhupada said, do you believe in infection? So my father said, yes, I believe in infection. And Prabhupada said, just like if you eat the food of a sick person, you will get their disease. So if you eat the food that Krishna has eaten, you will be infected with Krishna's disease. So what's really interesting about prasadam, of course, those of us who intentionally grow food or shop for food with the idea of cooking for Krishna and intentionally prepare the food with the idea that we will offer it to Krishna and try to offer it with some love and some affection and some personal sense of Krishna enjoying it. And those of us who eat the remnants of this food also with some attempt at devotion and gratitude and meditation. Still, we can give this food even to those who aren't like that, who just think it's food, who just think, well, here's a cookie, or here's a veggie burger, or, here's a samosa. And the food has a spiritual effect, just like if I eat the food that a sick person has eaten, I'll get sick, even if I didn't know that they were sick, right? We're in this pandemic, and you can get COVID from someone who doesn't themselves even know they have COVID at the time, right? This is the way diseases work. So the same is true with spiritual life. That same principle is there. And the effect of prasadam is that it purifies one, because food that's been offered to Krishna, it's full of the Shuddha Sattva. It's full of truth. It's reality. It's saturated with this love of giving, with this sense of sharing on the highest level of divinity. And even if you don't know that, by eating it, one's sense of loving sharing rather than selfishness starts to awaken. It starts to awaken. And the physical experience of eating this food is also different than eating ordinary food. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu talked about this phenomenon at one point. He said, this thing we're eating, he said, we know the ingredients, but why does it taste different? What is the taste that's different? He said, it's because it's been eaten by God. And we're actually tasting God when we eat it. So I've told this story many times, but it's just such a funny story. I was in Puerto Rico, and we were going to be giving a talk and having a kirtan at the university. So I was cooking. I used to cook in the morning for all the devotees there. So I was cooking. And while I was cooking the main meal, rice, dal, chapati, sabji, there was a devotee there making cookies. And these were the simplest possible cookies you can make. Butter, sugar, flour, maybe some vanilla, and maybe some, baking powder, baking soda. That was it. I know that was it because I was in the kitchen when she was making them. So we took these cookies to the university. I gave a talk about Krishna consciousness at the university. And afterwards, people were asking me questions. On an individual level, they were coming up to the podium and they were asking me questions. And during that time, the other devotees there were giving out these cookies and giving out Bhagavad-gītā and so forth. So I never got to eat one of these cookies. But while they were being given out, because they were all gone by the time I finished answering questions, so many people, at least 40 people, I don't know how many people were there, like 120, 150, at least 40 people came up to me and said, "Can I have the recipe for these cookies?" And every time someone said that, I felt astonishment. Okay, butter, sugar, flour, vanilla, baking powder. Like, that was it. People were going nuts. Why? Because when we offer food to Krishna, he actually tastes it. Look, people always talk about how, their mother's cooking is better than what's in the restaurant. Why? Because there's love in it. And that's not an imagination. Cooking isn't just the physical elements. It isn't. On a subtle level, we feel the emotion that goes into the cooking. Just like we feel the emotion that goes into a gift. What to speak of, we're dealing with Krishna. When Krishna is eating the food that we prepare, and he's full of love, and his love and his taste and his flavor then fills that food and he returns it to us. I mean, again, on a mundane level, at a wedding, they often have this little thing where the bride and groom are sticking cake in each other's mouths. And it's not just the cake, it's their affection for each other. Or the parent feeding the child, and then the child takes some food off their plate and gives it to the parent. So multiply that billions and billions and billions of times, and it tastes different. The experience is different. One is not just eating the food. I mean, again, what is food made out of? It's made out of sunshine, water, and earth minerals. Even on a material level, the different flavors in the food are coming from Krishna. Krishna says he's a taste of water. He says he's the light of the sun and the moon. He says he's the fragrance of the earth. So even on a material level, the different flavors between the 40 different kinds of mangoes and the different flavor between a mango and an apple and a pear, all of those different flavors come from Krishna. Then Krishna himself was the source of all those flavors. He's directly touching that food that's been offered to him. So the origin of all different flavor is imbuing that food with love. And so the experience is amazing. I heard a story once of these devotees. They were taking a car trip. They stop at a gas station, petrol station out in the middle of nowhere. And some woman runs out of the shop connected to the gas station and sees them. And, "You're the Hare Krishnas, right?" "Oh, yeah. Do you have any of those little white bowls? I had one of them 5 years ago and I haven't stopped thinking about them since." So this is we see it. Or I remember my sister-in-law, she said, "I know you gave me your recipe for how you make rice, and I've tried it so many times, and it never turns out the way you make it. I can't figure it out." So we have this experience so many times that there's something mystical and transcendental and amazing going on. And again, if that's true, on the material level, when we share food with those we love, on the material level, even though our love on the material level also has a lot of disappointments and heartache, how much is that true on the spiritual level, where everything is perfect? So this is not a difficult thing to do. It's a practice of Krishna consciousness that doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of effort, doesn't take a lot of equipment. Anybody can do it. That we cook pure vegetarian food, no meat, no fish, no eggs, and we also don't use onions or garlic. We don't taste the food while we're cooking. We're cooking for the pleasure of the Lord in the mood of being a servant. And then we have a ceremony of offering. It can be as simple as you have a picture of Krishna on a shelf and you put your food in front of the picture and you chant Hare Krishna and you say, please, Krishna, please eat this food and please accept this food. And it can be as complicated as one has a regular worship program with deities and tulsi plants and knows all of the Sanskrit mantras. But the essence is that we're offering with love. And the essence is that the devotee doesn't eat anything that's not offered with love. Because otherwise we're just atmakarnat, we're just thinking about ourselves. And as soon as we just think about ourselves, we are completely out of sync with reality. We're in a false situation. Reality is not designed like that. Reality is designed for love and sharing and giving. So questions, comments, additions, subtractions, chastisements?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the how does the benefit to the devotee who prepares the food to be offered to Krishna and offers it to Krishna, how does the benefit to that devotee compare to the benefit to, say, let's say in this example, a non-devotee who gets to experience Krishna prasadam and get purified and, and get elevated by Krishna's love infused in the prasadam?
Well, anyone who's doing a regular practice is obviously going to make more progress than someone who's just doing something occasionally. So whatever it is that we're trying to be or accomplish in life, anything that we do regularly, right? I mean, like I exercise. If I just exercise once a week, I'm not going to get as much benefit as if I exercise every day. So the more that I can work on establishing that loving relationship with Krishna, ultimately it should be at every moment. But if I can't do it at every moment, then at least Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur explains I should have regular times when I'm doing it. At least I should have that practice yoga. Okay, at this time I'm going to really work on that connection. Now, for somebody who's not at all practiced that and gets this experience, it may really stand out for them because it's in such contrast to their normal consciousness. So for a materialistic person who's really just absorbed in themselves and what they want, and is, their loving relationships may not be that satisfying. When they have some experience of genuine, authentic spirituality that touches the soul, the contrast with their everyday life may be so extreme that they really go, wow, what was that? So on one level, it may seem that a devotee, especially one who's in Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, who's regularly offering their food to Krishna out of affection for Krishna and out of a joy for Krishna, but also out of a shastric regulation and as a discipline, may not always feel that main contrast with materialistic life. Although actually their progress is more substantial.
Thank you. I think Sasha has a question.
Yeah, just maybe a short comment that, like you said about giving gifts and buying them, like it brings more happiness than just buying something for yourself. So actually, like nowadays in corporate sector, at least in my work, when someone leaves the job, then we buy a gift card, and which actually takes some fee also and commission, and then the person gets gift card, so they will buy something for themselves. So it's becoming very formal nowadays.
Yes. But even so, if I give you a gift card where you can buy something for yourself, I'm still giving you something. And it feels different. You know, if I get a gift card from you and I use that to buy something that I want, it still feels different than if I just use money I've earned to buy something that I want. It's a different feeling to it. And again, we all know this. Otherwise, as far as I know, every human culture has these kinds of traditions and rituals. I don't think there's any human culture that doesn't, where people give to each other. Even though you're risking that what you give and what you receive may not be what you like as much if you could have picked it out yourself. Isn't that funny? I mean, if we just think about it logically, it's a very odd practice. And if you think of how much time and effort that you have to put into it, especially at major gift-giving events, and how interesting that, you know, in the West, the major gift-giving event is Christmas. First of all, it's associated with something religious. It's associated with Lord Jesus Christ. And I don't know of anything equivalent that's focused on just getting something for yourself. I don't think there's any other, you know, like 6-week-long buying push that, okay, in celebration of this festival, everybody should buy as many things for themselves as possible. I don't know of any such thing. Interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's these things are little indicators of what reality is. They give us a little hint. Like Prabhupada writes in the preface of Nectar Devotion that, you know, everyone has a propensity to love someone, even a tiger has that propensity. So especially in the human form, we have these little hints and they become ritualized in human culture. You know, and giving food to others. I mean, a big part, again, as far as I know, every single human culture, a big part of any kind of celebration or festival is sharing food. And it's major. This concept of sharing food. Sharing food with friends, with family, with those who are less fortunate. You know, there's something, and then there's something in every religion about involving God in your eating. So these are little indicators, there's a little hints that, oh, you know, something's going on here, and that there's something as part of reality that involves giving and sharing of food with love and involving God in that process. Anybody else?
I had a comment to in support of your thesis here. When I remember, so when I was a newer devotee, meaning I guess 1991, after having spent maybe half a year or a year in the temple at the time. And so the major experiences that would stand out, at least in my mind, as transformative experiences would be associating with devotees in events such as kirtan, or especially Harinam Sankirtan outdoors before the public, and learning about Krishna in classes, and then and the more transformative, but in a more challenging way, when I would join others in going out and distributing Prabhupada's books and meeting strangers. And yet, a memory I have, an impression I have that really, really stands out is in regards to preparing prasadam. And yet, anyone who knows me knows that that's not part of my repertoire of activities that I can boast about being good at or doing hardly any of. It's preparing prasadam. But when I would visit my parents in my early years after moving into the temple as a full-time devotee, I would I understood from others that one of the main ways that I'm going to be able to share Krishna consciousness with them is through what they can relate to, which is eating a nice meal prepared by someone who cares about them and who they care about a lot, myself. So, and I had Korma's cookbook, The Great Vegetarian Dishes, and I was very careful. So I prepared, I guess, his khichdi from there, his halva from there. It's possible one other dish, but I can't remember, but probably just those two things. But I prepared them, I guess, meticulously following his instructions, and his cookbooks are excellent. So when you follow his instructions, it works. And so, I have this really special impression of being in my parents' apartment in Manhattan in their kitchen, and after preparing the food was definitely a special event. I was very involved and very focused, and so it felt, intense but happy and warm. But I remember when I offered the food, because I had very little, I didn't offer food very much, even as living in the temple. So when I was offering the food, I didn't have too much experience with doing it. So I had all the, I was prepared in advance about the prayers I would recite. I had pictures of Prabhupada and Krishna and Lord Chaitanya out and so forth. And I had a nice place prepared to offer Krishna his food and Prabhupada his food, the disciplic succession. And I remember when I offered it, and I offered my prayers out loud, it was like the world around me, I really felt like it totally transformed, and it was just a natural, it wasn't like I was trying to experience something spiritual. I was so endeavoring so intensely to do something good for my parents that there was no room for me to be worried about my feelings and my sentiments. But the reality was I had an incredible experience of deep Krishna consciousness and happiness and faith in Krishna and like that. And this was one of the biggest Krishna conscious experience or strongest Krishna conscious experiences I had during my first year living in the temple, which was going home to my parents in their apartment and preparing them prasadam and then praying to Krishna, like vandanam, and then offering food to Krishna, where I really got to get close to Krishna. And then when I gave the food after the prayers were done, I gave the food to my parents. There was no doubt I had no doubts that this was a really special and valuable event for them. And not that I was successful in proselytizing, but more that, I was sharing something that was as true ultimately for them as it is for me. So anyway, I just wanted to say that in support of your talk.
That's just wonderful. It's just really wonderful. Yeah, that's really wonderful. I mean, you brought out something, kind of an extra layer, that when I am sharing with Krishna, with the idea that when I'm sharing with Krishna, I'm going to be sharing with others, it adds exponentially to the whole reciprocation that's going on. You know, when I'm thinking, well, I'm sharing this with Krishna because I like pizza and I want to eat pizza, so I'm making pizza and I'm going to give it to Krishna because that's what I'm supposed to do, because Krishna says that in the Bhagavad-gītā. You know, that's nice. But if I'm thinking, oh, I really, really want to help these people, I really want to love these people, I really want to be good for these people, it changes everything. The more that we're in that mood, the more happy and peaceful we are.
And if I might add one more thing, Mataji.
Yes, please.
On that, just following the anecdote, which is, so that was, I guess, just short of 30 years ago today, and only recently, a few months ago, my father passed away, and I guess just anyway, Prabhupada emphasizes the importance of, you were saying that Prabhupada was teaching us, you know, give this life to Krishna. And so consistent with that point is time, you know, there's little time we have in this life to give Krishna consciousness to others. And so looking back on the endeavors I made to help others, and here that would be my family, while I certainly could have done more, and I wish I had, and yet those endeavors that I made, I'm so glad that I did that, because I've had other experiences where I'm convinced that my father really did benefit in a tremendous way. And I think it's times like these in which I took to heart the teachings, Prabhupada's teachings, and implemented them, that I really did make a difference in others' lives. And so I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. That's very moving. Thank you. So I guess we should end here.